Now, you have said somewhat famously in women's circles, or at least in my world, that other countries have social safety nets, the US has women. And you argue that it's kind of intentional and systematic that women have become the social safety net in the US. Before we talk about the women's strike, can you break down that thesis? Why is it that you say this?
Yeah, so essentially, other countries have invested in social safety nets to help people manage risk. They use taxes and regulations, especially on wealthy people and corporations, to protect people from falling into poverty and precarity, to give them a leg up in reaching economic opportunities, and also to ensure that everyone has the time and energy to help take care of their communities and their families and their homes and even themselves. Whereas in the US, we've instead tried to DIY society. We've kept taxes low and slashed huge holes in the safety net that we do have. And we've told people that if they just make good choices, they won't actually need a social safety net at all. And the problem there is that the people do need a social safety net. Forcing people to manage that much risk on their own has left many families and communities teetering on the edge of collapse. And yet we haven't, in part because we have women holding it together, filling in the gaps both in our economy and in our social safety net. So women are the default caregivers for the children, for the sick, for the elderly. And they're also the ones who are disproportionately filling the lowest paid jobs in our economy. Jobs oftentimes in essential service sectors that are too labor intensive, but also too necessary to be both kind of profitable and broadly accessible. Jobs in childcare, jobs in home health care that other countries have funded as part of the safety net instead. And so what I show in the book is that women's unpaid and underpaid labor is helping to maintain this illusion of a DIY society and making it seem as though we can get by without investing in the kind of social safety net that many other countries take for granted.
You've also written that billionaires and big corporations, for-profit corporations, have effectively bought politicians that embrace their view of a DIY society. So how much blame do we have to give billionaires and big corporations for the state of affairs right now?
I mean, I think we can trace it all the way back even a century. In the book, I trace this back to the 1930s and to the reaction of wealthy people and corporations to the New Deal, to Franklin Roosevelt's policies put in place in the wake of the Great Depression, which was where we first saw kind of increasing corporate tax rates as a way to fund this kind of stronger social safety net, things like Social Security and Medicare. And at the time, those wealthy people and kind of big business elites were looking for ways to persuade the American public that we didn't actually need a social safety net, that we could get by without one. And what they found at the time was essentially neoliberal philosophy, a group of economists in Austria who were developing this idea that countries don't actually need social safety nets and are actually better off without them because people without that protection will keep themselves safe from risk. And this idea has been widely debunked over time, but it was used to fuel kind of decades-long propaganda campaigns, to shape decades of US social and economic policy, and to create this sort of perception that we didn't need a social safety net, which many people in the US continue to believe today, despite the evidence that this is causing harm, and particularly causing harm to the women who are trying to pick up the pieces and hold it together instead.